Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business editor Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnow.
And we're recording this on the last week of January. The big news in San Antonio over the last few days has been the fact that after many years, I've lost track, maybe 6 years or something like that, of haggling between the city and the San Antonio firefighters.
1660.
It runs together in my mind.
It all feels kind of the same.
That we now seem to have a deal between the San Antonio firefighters and the city of San Antonio. And this was arrived at by a 3-member arbitration panel. Joshua Fechter has done the major reporting on this, and I would really recommend reading his work, and there's going to be more to follow. And Brian is also covering this. But I think we could say at this point that it looks pretty similar to what the police officers got.
I mean, similar enough that one might say. So the fire union waited how many years for this? I mean,
and
they didn't get a lot,
and
it wasn't a huge victory,
and tried to overturn the city charter and various other things.
And of course, they wanted arbitration. That was one of the amendments, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there'll be a lot more to cover there. But as we've talked about on the show over the last couple of months, one of the big races in the San Antonio area this year is the Precinct 3 County Commissioner race, and particularly the Republican primary, because I think this is a Republican seat. It's been held by Kevin Wolf, who decided not to run again. So I think that most people would say that the winner of the Republican primary is going to be the likely commissioner in Precinct 3. And we're happy to be joined today by one of the candidates in that primary, public relations and marketing consultant Trish DeBerry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Now, as many of our listeners know, you did run for office once before in 2009. You finished second in the 2009 mayoral election won by Julian Castro. And one of the things I was wondering is you've been involved in politics so much, often kind of guiding candidates. Between 2009 and 2019, when you decided to run for this seat, did you ever have any instances when you got tempted to run for something else?
I would tell you the past 10 or 11 years really has been spent business-wise, raising kids. As you all both know, my kids were really young when I looked at jumping into the mayor's race. I got into that race late, January, I think. I think we made a valiant effort. We worked really, really hard. I just think we kind of, what I like to tell people is we ran out of runway.
You finished ahead of 2 council members at the time.
I felt like momentum shifted. Yeah. As a candidate, sometimes you feel in your gut, hey, we're clicking, we're going, we're moving. And, it just, like I said, we came to the end, and it was too little, too late. But was very focused on the business. I will tell you, no. I said when I ran for mayor, I was not a professional politician. Mm-hmm. I still think that's the case now. When I ran for mayor, just like when I'm running for this office, some of it is gut. You take a look at it and you're like, I think I can make a difference here. I've grown up in the precinct, spent all my life really in Precinct 3, very familiar with the issues in Precinct 3. And from a timing standpoint, my kids are at an age, I have a graduating senior in high school. I just thought, I'm going to take a close look at this. And so here I am. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you there are distinct differences. Running for mayor, people know exactly what the mayor of the city does. To a person, when I'm out block walking, knocking on doors, people are like, we like you, we want to vote for you, but what does the county commissioner do?
Well, could you explain that to us? Because we sometimes wonder.
We've been covering this for years, and we still don't know.
County commissioner is the greatest job in the world because you get paid, 150
6 figures.
Yeah, 6 figures, and nobody knows what you do. Nobody really.
Well, I think that's. The good thing about the job is I do think where I'm concerned, because I've done so much outreach, so much education, I do think it's an opportunity to educate people on the importance of county government, because I don't disagree with you. People focus on the city. There's a lot of scrutiny on the city. People talk to their city council people. They look at what the mayor does. That gets all the attention. What operates in the county, a lot of people don't know about. And so I've talked about on the campaign trail, I want to educate people on the importance of county government. I want to bring transparency to county government, which I think is really, really important. It's kind of been a tomb over there for a long time. We don't know what's going on. I think the more transparent we can be about things, the better off county government is going to be.
One of the things you've talked about is, just how property appraisals are out of control. I think anybody who owns property in this area probably feels that way, and wanting to revamp the appraisal process. How would that work, or how would the Commissioners Court have the ability to do that?
I think it's complicated, for sure. But the second question, usually when I'm at the doorstep, is, what issues are important to you, aside from the fact that you don't really understand what a county commissioner does? People, especially in the neighborhoods, talk about property taxes. Doesn't do us any good if we're keeping the tax rate flat, which I think Commissioners Court has done a good job about keeping it flat. But if appraisals are going through the roof, that is an effective tax increase. So, Gilbert, I'm going to have to dive into it. I mean, I tell people on the campaign trail all the time, I think I'm a person who's not a seat warmer. I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to dive into some of these issues that are very complicated. I think at the very least, I want to get a board on the board of directors of the appraisal district. Amasquita's got a lot of power. How those calculations are calculated, I think a more transparent process associated with that, I think, is important. Asking some tough questions over there. And I think really there again, from an education effort standpoint, I still don't think people know how to necessarily contest their appraisals. What does that look like? Sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, sometimes they don't, but there is a process by which you can protest.
So would that part of that involve educating your
Absolutely.
constituents to let them know this is what you can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I'm kind of the difference between Kevin and myself. There was never a presence in the precinct with a precinct office. I mean, there's a district office for the city council people, but there hasn't ever been anything in the precinct. And it's a big precinct. There's 500,000 people that are in the precinct. So we'd have to find somewhere that's conveniently located, which would be important. But I do think it's important to have a presence within the precinct so that people don't have to come all the way downtown. They have to park. They have to go to the courthouse. That's about being accessible, answering questions. And so I think part of that, if people have questions about appraisals, there'll be a place that they can come and ask those questions.
Yeah, just to go back to appraisals for a moment.
Yeah.
So, it sounds like what you're talking about is maybe looking at ways the appraisal district can more fairly evaluate properties, right? But frequently you'll hear, people who want to reform BCAD say, we should really directly elect their board. What do you think of that?
I think that could be interesting. Speaks to transparency, right? That's, I'm an elected office. I'm not, I don't necessarily think that every single, board position in this county or in this city should be appointed. I think that's slows down the process. But I think whereas appraisals are this important and it's a hot button issue for people, I don't think it's a bad idea. Yeah. Now, is that easy? No, it's not. Because really that's a legislature issue too. And so we've got to line up and we've got to do work at the county regarding appraisal reform, but we've also got to take appraisal reform to the legislature too. So nothing is easy and nothing is done overnight, but you've got to chip away at it and you've got to have somebody who's going to make it a priority. And like I said, dig into it.
I think one of the things that you've talked about is concern about county debt. And I think that when people observe the county government, and particularly during the years when Nelson Wolff has been county judge, there's been that kind of philosophical divide about should the county be doing these big legacy projects, which has certainly been a big part of his tenure, whether it's Tobin or San Pedro Creek improvements, and then others who say, we just have to stick to kind of the basic functions of county government, basic services. Where do you fall on that? And is there anything that you look at with the current budget that you think this is something that we could cut?
Oh, I've taken a cursory view of the budget and taken a look at that. I would tell you that I think there has been too much debt that's been incurred by the county. I think we've got to take a very hard look at paying down that debt. Because I think what I said at the editorial board is true today, and it's when I talk in forums. We've had a very robust economy, no question. But, heydays regarding the economy are cyclical, right? We're going to face a downturn at some point. We need to make sure that we've got checks and balances in place over the county and that we've taken care of some of that debt before we incur new debt as we look at what the future holds. I think there have been some very good return on investment regarding some of these projects. If you want to look at the Mission Reach, if you want to look at the Tobin Center. So I'm not going to necessarily be that candidate that says no to everything. But I think we've got to very judicious, very thoughtfully, very intentionally take a look at those projects and look at the return on investment and what is the cost to taxpayers.
What about the future phases of the San Pedro Creek restoration project? Is that something that you want to see through?
Based upon what I've heard, San Pedro Creek has the ability to I think, return like a 10-to-1 investment. I think they're already, I'm supposed to get some numbers and I've asked for what that looks like. But I would tell you, I think that's been a worthwhile project. I mean, it's a flood control project. And I think that from a hot tax standpoint, what it contributes to hot tax, there's a return on investment there. Big, expensive statues, I don't necessarily think there's necessarily a big return on investment associated with those things. But, Gilbert, I think to your point, when I talk to people about what does the county commissioner do, I mean, from a statutory standpoint, the purview regarding county government is really basic services as we look at drainage and flood control, which are important, but transportation. The county acts as a funnel when it comes to federal funding and state funding regarding transportation dollars that come down. And I do think, that transportation will be a major priority for me as we take a look at how things unfold in the future, because transportation projects, when you look at the bottlenecks that we have out in Precinct 3, are huge. I mean, we have 10,000 cars a day that are going through the intersection of Northwest Military and Wurzbach. I mean, growth is not going to stop coming here. And so, I know the mayor has talked about a transportation initiative and all those things, but we're going to have to get really laser focused on how we're going to address this.
How do you look at the whole issue of trying to find additional transit dollars from the basically, I don't want to use the word diverting, but redirecting that what have been dollars that have gone to aquifer protection and applying that sales tax money to transit. I mean, it's been another divisive issue.
Yeah, it has been, and I hear about it. I was at a District 9 Alliance meeting last week. Folks, especially particularly on the north side, I mean, they love their parks, they love their creeks. And for good or for bad, and I think it's been for good, we have really ingrained in people the Edwards Aquifer is the sole source of our drinking water, and we have to protect it. And we have ingrained that in people. And I think that that's a plus. But the problem with the exchange regarding transit dollars and, hey, saying
SAWS would take over.
I would rather have a road versus a greenway. I think people feel really, really uncomfortable about that. And I think you're going to have to get over that perception issue that transportation is more important than clean water. Because, like I said, we have done an amazing job telling people and really instilling in people that aquifer protection and green space is such a critical part of San Antonio. So I think it's tough.
Right. So out of all of this, I mean, the mayor is looking for SAWS to take up responsibility for aquifer protection, but also as part of that, you've got the county judge, Nelson Wolf, looking for county dollars to take over the Linear Creek part of it. What do you think of that kind of partnership between the city and county? I mean, how does that square with what you see as the county's mission?
Mm-hmm. Devil's in the details, right? I mean, the only thing that I've really seen is that 70% of city and county bond dollars, could go to transportation. I haven't seen the details associated with how much money the county is going to come up with to make up that difference. I am really concerned. SAWS, they balance the budget of the city on the backs of SAWS. And then you're going to take up more money regarding aquifer protection, and you're saying it's not going to lead to an effective water rate increase? I don't see how that happens.
But if just take the Linear Creek funding.
Yep.
So if that goes away, to your thinking, is that now county government's responsibility to take over that?
I don't think so. No. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, does there need to be a mechanism? Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it comes back to the county and there's a conversation, do we need to? That's not something, that decision that needs to be made in a vacuum.
Right.
I mean, we need to, regarding outreach, we need to talk to people. We need to get feedback associated with that. I think, by and large, too, what I hear from a county government standpoint is there's too much that happens behind closed doors. We need to get over that hurdle.
I wanted to ask you about bail reform.
Yeah.
Did you happen to read the story in the Sunday paper?
I did. Well, I talked a little bit about it at the Ed Board. I mean, we have several crises at the county between jail, constable, and bail reform. Yeah, there's some big crises. Good thing I know crisis communications.
Right. So Kevin Wolf made a pretty strong statement in that story that I wrote about the conflict with District Judge Ron Runkel, because long story short, his family owns a bail bond company, and he is the administrative judge who is in the center of the debate. He's on a committee that's going to have oversight of the new magistrates, and has a central role in crafting where we're going from here. So I guess the first question I would have is where would you like to see the county go on bail reform? Because there's a conflict between. Do we do a sweeping rule like Harris County did, where a huge chunk of misdemeanors are all personal recognizance bonds, or do we leave the discretion up to the judges in each individual case? And the second question would be, what do you think about District Judge Ron Rankel's role in this?
So again, a really complicated issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one that needs to be addressed for sure. If I'm out on the stump and on the campaign trail, it's not necessarily something I hear from people. I do hear about jail administration. People have a problem with folks walking out on the street that are supposed to be incarcerated. So, I mean, that resonates with people.
And I guess they connect. I mean,
No, absolutely. But, I mean, I do have a problem with people dying in jail. And from a PR bond standpoint, I do like the fact that the committee that apparently has been put together does include bail bondsmen that are part of that, because I definitely think that they've got to be a part of the solution. From a PR bond standpoint, on the other hand, though, I mean, we have people that are sex offenders, violent criminals that are getting out on PR bonds too. I mean, we shouldn't be offering PR bonds for any of that. Now, but from a PR bond standpoint, for a homeless person who's in the jail, why can't that happen? Or are there other mechanisms from a nonprofit standpoint that might be able to step in to be able to offer that?
Right, but you said you're hearing from people who are concerned in that area where you'd be representing of potentially violent or dangerous people being
absolutely.
Let out.
Yes. And then from a Ron Howell standpoint, I mean, I don't know him. I saw the story. I saw his answer to the question. I mean, I deal in optics and perception, right? I do think, that business. I mean, I do think from technically, it may not be a conflict. I think from a perception standpoint, it's a difficult call to say there's not a conflict.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned the jail issue, and I if I remember right, at the Ed Board, you talked about the possibility of maybe having the Commissioner's Court take over the administration of the jail.
I think that raised some eyebrows.
Yeah. Could you give us some idea of how that would play out?
I just think that this is not a problem that's occurred overnight, right? We seem to have seen this issue over several administrations, whether it's been a Republican administration, whether it's been a Democratic administration, as far as sheriff is concerned. I don't know if it's because there's more scrutiny or because you have a relatively newer administration that's been in regarding the problem, but 19 people that have been let out on the street. I mean, essentially, when I'm out there talking to people, I say, you don't even need a get out of jail free card to be able to get out of jail. I mean, you can just walk out. Yeah. That's a problem. People dying in the jail, I mean, that's a problem. So my sense is, from a sheriff standpoint, we've had a lot of folks that have come from law enforcement, that have been the sheriff. That is their wheelhouse, right? That is what they know. My feeling has been, let the badge do what the badge does best, and that's enforce the law. I don't know that they have the administrative skill set to run the jail, and I think that's a big job. By the time you do law enforcement, by the time you do jail administration, the job may have become too big for one person. So my thought was, and there again, it's not the solution, but it could be a potential solution, is not only should we be benchmarking against other counties about what they're doing right, taking some best practices, but from a private sector standpoint, maybe we look at turning administration of the jail back over to Commissioner's Court, letting us hire some professional jail administrators. Not talking about full board privatization, because I know that has its own issues, and people kind of go cray-cray when you talk about that. But is it?
Are you talking about half board?
Yeah. But is it a potential solution, considering what we're looking at? Because nobody seems to have been able to get it quite right. So,
one issue that I've kind of been obsessed with for the last couple of years is the issue of, and it kind of gets to what you've talked about with transparency, the fact that because the county is an arm of the state and we're sort of operating under the state rules, there are no campaign finance limits, no term limits for the county. There is that sort of sense that that anything goes there. Yeah. Obviously, making any kind of change,
Wild West.
Yeah, it would be very difficult because it would require legislative action at the state level. What are your thoughts, though, about those kind of issues?
Well, I mean, as somebody who's running for office, I certainly understand. Run campaigns before. I mean, there is a need to be able to raise money. I mean, much like when I got into this race, mid-October, late October. I mean, it's essentially like a startup business. I mean, there is a lot of capital that has to come in to be able to front the upfront costs or pay for the upfront costs associated with the campaign. Logo development, signage, hiring a campaign staff, website development, social digital assets, all those things. And so just, broadly from a campaign finance reform standpoint, I think people like to talk about that. But until such time as political ads become free, airtime becomes free, printers don't want to necessarily charge you anything, or postage for direct mail, which is really, really expensive. Yeah, I mean, plus, from a political standpoint, those costs have to be paid up front. Like, you've got to pay all of it. So from an understanding standpoint, yes, you have to have the ability to be able to raise money. But am I in favor of campaign contribution limits and just not leaving them broadly and wide open and so somebody could write a $25,000 check?
Sure.
Yes. I think we need an ethics group or committee or task force to be able to take a look at that and offer some recommendations. And I think, we'd see something that was reasonable. I do think campaign contribution limits at the council are too restrictive. I think that's tough for somebody to ramp up quickly who wants to get into the race because, look, it
almost favors the incumbent too much.
Exactly. Yeah. And to a certain extent, I mean, I've even had the question too, why don't you think more women have run for office over at the county? And some of it is the power of the incumbency. I mean, they've been there a long time, and they built up war chests. Yes, and
they can stay longer now than they used to.
It's a tough hurdle to overcome. Yes,
I want to ask you because I think this came up at the Ed Board, and obviously you have a successful business, and you've had some government contracts. So if you could maybe just convey to the listeners,
sure,
what contracts you have and how you would approach that. Would you recuse yourself in certain situations?
So I prefer not to recuse myself in the respect that if I do have a perceived or real conflict of interest with a contract, I'd rather just resign that contract so that there isn't a conflict. We currently hold one county contract, which is the Regional Mobility Authority contract. And if I get in the office, I've said I will resign that contract. Okay. There is other contract work, quasi-governmental work that we do. Brooks, we do a lot of marketing work.
Do you do any
as far
Sarah
as there can? We do some Sarah work, which is quasi. Yeah.
Well, with that one, I mean, given the county's relationship with Sarah.
No, it makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So, I mean, are you saying you would drop that contract?
Yep. Yep. I don't think you can go into office with that and just say, I'm going to recuse myself from that vote. Granted, it's a long slog until I get there, right? Yeah. I mean, we've got to get through a March primary. If it goes into runoff, it's May, and then we're looking at November, and you're not actually seated until January.
Well, if you win, I mean, what's your role with the DeBerry Group after that? Any thought of just saying? I mean, it's got your name on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that doesn't mean it has to be yours.
I mean, exactly. Yes, I have given that some thought. Yeah, and I think you'll see some. I think you'll see some developments that occur. Yeah, regarding partnership structure and what that looks like here. Yeah, very soon. I've had some people that have been working with me for 20 plus years. So it's not like we haven't had the conversation before, but it's also my baby.
To be clear, yeah, right, yeah. But just to be clear, I mean, you're talking about the potential for you just kind of stepping away from it, like walking away. Yeah. No equity owner, no equity stake in it or anything like that.
Still would have an equity stake, but it wouldn't necessarily be like hands-on every single day. Look, I put too much blood, sweat, and tears into that business, and I have 23 people that work for me. And people that are very dedicated, and I think we do very strong work. And I think the interesting thing about the work that we do, because we do some high-profile work, everybody considers it, you've just got government contracts. 75% of the work that we do is private sector. We've done a lot of work over the years for Dr. Smith's, maybe diaper rash ointment cream will come in handy over the county. I'm not sure. But
Gilbert,
trust me, it will.
I was going to say
totally will.
I'm sorry, I had to put that out there.
My wife and I would attest to the fact that Dr. Smith actually got us through some tough times when our daughter
well,
was
then
young.
it will get the county through some tough times too. But I think I was very intentional before I ran for the race to look at those, what could be perceived conflicts of interest, and vetted those really, really carefully. So
before we wrap things up, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the November election. You've obviously been involved in campaigns a lot. We're hearing that we're going to have massive turnout in Texas and I'm sure in Bexar County in
registrations
November.
Through the roof.
Right. And, there are different thoughts. Some think this is going to be a big year for Democrats, and some think, well, the Republicans are really motivated to turn out. I think regardless, I think Precinct 3 is probably a pretty safe Republican seat. But when you just look at the trends and what's going to happen in Bexar County, I mean, what is your sense about what we're going to see this year?
Yeah, I think we'll have really, really strong voter turnout on both sides. For all the reasons that we've heard and all the reasons that we've talked about. The impeachment process, I think, has really fired up the base. As far as the Republican base is concerned, I think they're upset about it. And I think your hardcore, right voter, despite the fact that it's not a crowded field in the Republican primary, will want to go in there to be able to say, heck yeah. Yeah.
So you don't think this is going to be one of these years when sometimes we'll see the courthouse just kind of
I don't think so. Well, and
I
I think that the really helpful thing, Gilbert, is we don't have straight ticket voting, which I think will be incredibly helpful. We're at it's a heavy ballot. We're at the very bottom. Electronic voting at least pushes people kind of to the bottom, and you have to. And from a straight ticket standpoint, that's why you guys are talking about appointment of judges, right? I mean, we saw some really good D's swept out in straight ticket voting. We saw some really good R's in the judicial offices that were swept out. So, but I think Bexar County is largely, they're Democratic. So, not the precinct, but Bexar County overall. So, considering the competitive primary and the D, I think you'll have heavy voter turnout there too.
Let's talk about the primary and the R. So
yes.
I've never thought of you as a red meat conservative. So do you find yourself kind of sweating out? I mean, you have a lot of excitement on the right over impeachment. How does that affect your race? I mean, is that a cause of concern for you that you're not a more kind of vitriolic?
Well,
Republican?
I think that's why there are so many people that are in the race right now. I would tell you that, from a Republican principle standpoint, I think I'm the only candidate in the race that's really reflective of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, fiscal conservative, don't count on anybody else, create jobs for people, sign paychecks.
More of a traditional Republican
exactly,
sort of approach.
Right, exactly. But, those questions come up when we're out block walking. So, whether or not the county has any jurisdiction over that or not, there's some that doesn't matter what the county does. That's really, really important to them. So, I don't kid myself and say that I'm going to please all of the people all the time, but I think the experience that I have speaks for itself. The outreach, the consensus building, the broad base of support, all those things I think are really helpful.
I would imagine you're hearing a lot about the impeachment hoax because a lot of Trump supporters really believe that this is essentially a Democratic frame-up. How do you respond to that at the door?
I don't know if I've heard so much necessarily about it being a hoax. I think they consider it a waste of time. Yeah. Practically speaking, considering what we know is likely going to happen, there will probably be something, an indictment that comes down in the House, but it's going nowhere in the Senate. It is sort of a waste of time at this point. That's from a practical standpoint. I just think we have so many far-reaching issues, critical, that it's sucking all of the oxygen out of the room, and we all know where this is going, how it's going to end. We've seen it happen before.
Well, in 5 weeks, I guess you'll know.
It's a hardcore sprint right now, Gilbert, let me tell you. Yeah.
You'll know a lot more. So Well, thank you for joining.
No, thanks for the opportunity. I'm a regular listener, so when you guys start charging, charging for the the charging for the podcast. Yeah,
we hadn't thought of that. That's a great idea.
We'll see. We need some business
and we
sense here.
And we didn't even get to talk about constables today. So
that'll be the next time.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining us, and for those of you listening, we'll be back next week. Take care.
Thanks, guys.